Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, just ahead of the Christmas weekend, I like to discuss the state of play with the battle for public sector workers to beat our poverty government. Too late, I'm afraid, to rescue their own Christmas for those who couldn't afford the basics at any time of year. But I'm going to take a look at where the wins and losses are right now. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, what was I going to go with? I'm just going to go with an update here because I'm aware of what's going on. By the time this video is published, you're all leathered from the office Christmas party. You're trying to work out who it was that was photocopying their arse again. You're hoping against heaven it wasn't you. And we just want something a little bit light. And a little word about the Christmas schedule, first of all, as well. So I will be doing just one video a day over the next 3 days. That's Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day, or St. Stephen's Day, if Jacob Rees-Mogg happens to be watching. In terms of the time, I wasn't really sure, do I go for the 12 o'clock or do I go for the 5 o'clock? But as the Sunday Roast Christmas special, which I'll be on for a short while, is scheduled for 5 p.m. on Christmas Day, I'll do my releases at noon over the next 3 days. But anyway, how are things shaping up for the public sector strikes? Now, as I've mentioned before, there have been a lot of strikes this year, way more than you may imagine if you've just been reading the press. Years of real terms pay cuts, a stagnant economy, and now really high inflation has meant that many workers in both the public and private sector have been pushed below the breadline. And this is why it matters so much right now, because the impact will be felt particularly keenly at Christmas. In a society, there's a certain expectation of how you live your life. You get certain cultural norms. One of our cultural norms is that people at Christmas eat too much, maybe drink too much, you've all been drinking too much, and certainly spend on things you wouldn't at other times of the year. And I'm a miserable bastard. I would sooner leave all the modern Christmas frippery behind, far too commercial, but I engage as much as I have to because, you know, you want to fit in with others. There are others who seem to enjoy it. You don't want to be Mr. Killjoy sat in the corner, you know, grimacing. But hard-working nurses, ambulance drivers, rail workers, others are denied access to this cultural norm. And society makes them feel bad because they're not participating. Humans, you know, occasionally stand up, but mostly we conform because we're pack animals. We want to, you know, we form these sort of societal bonds. We have the likes of the Daily Express front page today emphasising the need to conform to this Christmas consumerism behaviour. But if nurses and other key workers need food banks during the year to feed themselves and the families, then of course conforming to this normal Christmas behaviour is out of the question. And you worry about the impacts on the kids if you can't provide the Christmas that they sort of think is supposed to be provided. And the reason it's out of the question, it's not because they're trying to have an overindulgent Christmas, the likes of which only the wealthiest could enjoy, but because they're simply not paid enough to be able to afford the standard of living that our society's developed to expect. You know what the latest is? We talk about 30p late. There was another Tory MP tosser, don't remember who it was, who was trying to give people some help. Oh, I'll help them. Because this is what they try and say. There's no such thing as poverty. Oh, there's Tory's line. There's no such thing as poverty. If people are pleading poverty, it's because they're not very good at spending the money. I'll help them. I'll show them how they can make their money stretch. You know what this one was doing? She was talking about ironing old wrapping paper so you could use it again. Oh yeah, nice one. People who can't afford to eat every day, that's the solution. Iron some old wrapping paper. Theresa May used to talk about needing to pay attention to jams. These were people who were just about managing. Well, they're not managing anymore. Negotiations didn't work earlier this year, so in many cases, strike action that was always left. And in the private sector, there have been a lot of success stories. I've talked about this, you don't see it in the news. You know, but company bosses have decided that a reasonable pay increase is less costly than the loss of productivity caused by extended strike action. They'll have also surely recognised that workers really were struggling with the cost of living. In fact, my partner's company have issued like 3 pay rises this year without any strikes needing to be threatened. Some companies just get it. Some need a bit of a nudge. and some need a slap across the face with a wet fish. And then there's our government. With the exception of barristers, in the few days that Liz Truss was pretending to be Prime Minister, the Tories have refused to budge on pay talks. In many cases, refused even to hold pay talks. They refused to attend the pay talks between the RMT and the rail bosses. Health Secretary Steve Barclay keeps saying his door is open for talks. Oh, it's disappointing about the strikes. My door is always open for talks. But he refuses to talk about pay. What does he want to talk about? I'm not sure how talking about the weather or the quality of stethoscopes these days is going to sort out the strike, Steve, mate. And I've discussed before how these strikes cannot hope to work on a financial basis, which is how they normally work. They normally go, look, the Labour withdrawing is going to cost you more than it costs to just give us a decent pay rise. But the government don't care how badly the economy's hit because they've bollocksed it anyway. In fact, for some people, it gives them a ready excuse. So when the next bit of economic bad news comes out, oh, that's all the people that went on strike. It would have been fine if it weren't for that. But also, even they know for most people they're not going to buy that. But when the ship is already sinking, what's one more hole in the hull? The government also don't care about the loss of public sector workers if a fair pay offer isn't agreed. They want that. They want people to go and work in the private sector. They want them to stop nursing and go and work at Tesco's. They've been trying to shut down nationalised public services for years. If key workers bugger off to work in a private company, that makes their job way easier. After all, think about this. We've got a shortage of about 47,000 nurses in the English NHS. Presumably the government budget for the wages of those nurses exists, should a load magically appear to apply for the jobs. As far as the government's concerned, they don't want those nurses appearing. So they view the shortages as not a problem with capacity, but money saved on the wages. They don't think about the damage it's doing to businesses when you've got people who can't get back to work because they need an operation that they can't get. Same thing with a strike, saving money on the wages, brilliant. And the people dying because those shortages mean delays in getting healthcare, not their problem. So the way these strikes work, and I said this right at the start of summer, it's going to be the PR battle. It's not about demonstrating that it's just cheaper to come to a deal than it is to not. It was always going to be a PR battle. Striking workers had to win over the public. So how's that looking? Well, it's good news for the emergency service workers, at least in the NHS. I talked recently about how nurses were enjoying strong public support for their strikes, even amongst Conservative voters, because that's what matters. Well, the latest poll has it increasing still further, slightly, but still further. Last week, Conservative voters, 48% in favour of the nurses striking, 47% against. Now it's tipped a little bit more, so it's now 49% in favour, still the same 47% against. So it's still evenly split, there's not a lot in it, but the point is that support for nurses actually increased since the strike started. And I mean amongst Conservative voters, doesn't matter about other voters. Conservatives don't care about them. Amongst the general public, it's 66% support to 28% against. Even for older voters, the really important voting bloc, 58% in support, 37% against. But when you look at these figures for Conservative voters, you would imagine that the proper die-hard Tory voters, the ones that are just always going to vote Tory, are the ones against the strikes. Well, they're going to vote Tory no matter what, so their opinion doesn't matter even to the Conservative Party. The ones with the nurses are surely those more moderate, centrist voters who could easily switch to another party at the next election. These polling results are bad for the Conservatives, and the fact that support for nurses actually slightly increased despite the briefing war against them by the Tories and the Tory press should be deeply concerning to them. Similar story for ambulance staff. There are slightly more Conservative voters against than for, but it's still evenly split, which means almost certainly the important swing voters are probably on the side of the workers here. Now, for all other striking workers, public support varies. Some of them do have strong public support, some of them don't have strong public support. But when you look at the Conservative voters, they tend to be very clearly against the workers. They're only really on the side of nurses and paramedics here. And because public opinion matters bog all in a first-past-the-post system like ours, the Conservatives will feel they can ignore those. People will say, but the public are in favour of that. Doesn't matter. The public don't vote Tory. Conservative voters vote Tory. Swing voters sometimes vote Tory. That's it. You know, they will, of course, have more targeted polls of their own, so they'll have a much more detailed picture than I do. But we know that some Conservative MPs are talking about the need to do more for nurses. We've even seen Rishi Sunak, although he's still insisting they're not going to improve this year's pay offer, hinting that next year's will be a bit more generous. You know, so there's an attempt at a shift there. So as I've said before, it's likely that their targeted polling backs up my hypothesis that more changeable Tory voters, the less reliable Tory voters, tend to be on the side of the striking workers. Then consider that even those against may not be against fair pay rises. I have seen quite a few Conservatives commenting on social media that they don't agree with the strikes, they shouldn't be going on strike, no. But they're also saying that nurses should be paid more. So just because some Conservative voters are saying that they're against the strikes doesn't mean they agree with the way the government's treating them. So the Tories and the Tory press are playing a high stakes game here. They've been briefing against nurses and ambulance staff heavily this week. They've been shining a spotlight on the deaths caused during the strike period, ignoring the many more deaths which have occurred when they're not on strike, but just short-staffed. But with the public increasingly on the side of these workers, they run the risk of people, quite correctly, blaming the government for these deaths. Oh, this person died. Yeah, that was your fault, Mr. Sunak. It wasn't because he was breaking the rules. He was breaking the rules when people still liked him. It's that he was breaking the rules while their loved ones were dying alone. It was the complete lack of solidarity that sunk him. And this is similar. The strikes didn't have to go ahead. In fact, the strikes this week, from nurses at least, would have been cancelled if the government had just agreed to talk about pay. No conditions. Just sit at a table, eat a mince pie and talk. Something politicians love to do. Wouldn't have stopped the strikes next month, but it would have stopped them this week. But although other public sector workers are losing the PR battle amongst Conservative voters, nurses and paramedics are winning. Despite all the hate that they've got directed at them in the media from the government, ordinary people are still on their side. It's a shame they don't have the same empathy for other workers who are facing the same levels of poverty, more so in some cases. It's exactly the same issue for all of them. But that's what happens when your media doesn't bother reporting the facts, doesn't bother reporting in the national interest, but reports in the interests of a small clique of very powerful, very wealthy individuals. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you can find it with your alcohol-addled brain. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, when you're a bit more sober, I'll see you later.